Welcome, everyone. Thanks for joining me today, and I hope to give you some really good ideas during the next hour. We're going to talk about some of the essential requirements that we're seeing for new websites that are coming up in currently as people talk to us about building websites for them. So the agenda that I'm going to follow, I'm going to talk about mobile-friendly sites and how important they are. I'm going to talk about some design thoughts regarding specifically conversion. I'm going to talk about choosing the right content management system. So if you're doing an upgrade or thinking about an upgrade, you'll be going through the thought process of what content management system to choose. I'm also going to talk about what one we have standardized on. I'm also going to talk about some of the complex data requirements that some websites have and just talk through a case study of how one can approach that and how one can talk to one's designers about delivering that kind of complexity so that it's simple to use in-house. Because more and more we're seeing the requirement is that people want to be able to manage complex data, but they want to manage it in-house. They don't want to have to hand it off to their web developer every time they want to change. The other thing I'm going to talk about is striking the right balance between user experience and design. There's a whole set of thinking around user experience, which is different from website design. And I think it's really important to know the difference. And I've got some pointers for you on that particularly. And then finally, there are some extra questions that people have posted when they registered. And also, I've got at the end of each section an opportunity for you to have a think about any questions that you want to ask of that section. I'll hold all questions to the end, but what I'd like to do is I'd like to give you a moment just to think about what we've just discussed and then pop any questions that you've got into the chat box so that I can pick those up at the end as well. Okay, good. So first of all, let's think about how important is mobile-friendly site in 2016. At the moment, Google, and actually this has been going on now for a good 12 months, really heavily. Google have been saying, make your website mobile friendly. There was Mobilegeddon earlier on in 2015 where they were saying, you know, if you don't sort your mobile friendliness of your website out, you know, the world is going to come tumbling down. Well, what I'd like to do is I'd actually like to see how can you assess, I'd like to think about how can you assess or see whether mobile makes a difference to your website and is it important? I know Google are saying it's important and there's some truth in that and we'll discuss that. But also how is mobile used in your buying journey? So when your buyer goes through a purchasing experience, what actually happens and how do they use mobile within that? And I'm going to show you a case study of a very big client and some of their numbers. And it's a very interesting case study. And also, I'm going to talk specifically about what impact it has on search results. Because if Google is saying we should all be doing mobile websites, then one assumes that they might be negatively affecting search results. And I'll give you some pointers on that. I don't know if you've been on the tube recently, but this is a typical commuter experience. People are just constantly on their mobile devices looking at things. I don't know if you've seen it, you maybe do it yourself, but you know, they're looking things up. So that is a typical picture that I've seen and people glued to their mobile devices. And I know I've watched over the shoulder of people where they've literally been going through and they've been looking for things that they're interested in. They've been reading articles on Facebook and then they've been clicking through to websites. So this is going on. There's no doubt about it. People are using their mobiles more and more, and at some point they may be touching your site. Now, the big question you want to try to answer is how and when. Now, this is an example of a client of ours who are very big in the B2B training space. So they sell B2B, business-to-business training. They have, over the past 12 months, as you can see there in that bottom greenish line, 20% to 27% of traffic is via mobile devices. Now, this is all sessions, so this is every single visitor. We did a different filter on this, which is we reduced the number of people we were analyzing to those just that converted. Now, the interesting thing is immediately, as against 20-odd% for the all visitors, if you look at the green line, it's dropped down to 11% for the people who are converting and are coming in on mobile. So in February 2015, they had 11% of their conversions take place on mobile. Now, interestingly, in the same period this year, that's dropped down to 8%. Now, they have increased the volume of their traffic. So during that period, the amount of traffic has increased quite considerably, but the percentage of mobile of that traffic has actually decreased when you filter it down to just those people who are converting. So it's an interesting question. Is your conversion taking place on mobile? Now, by conversion, I mean signing up for a download or signing up to buy something. Are purchases taking place on mobile? Their conversions are not done directly online. Actually, their conversions happen offline, but there's an entry point into the process where they kick off and they capture the person, their details online, and that's what's being tracked here. So you can see there's a difference between the amount of people who are viewing, which is this first chart, all sessions, so 20 to 27% growth in mobile, definitely, but actually the people who are converting, those are now showing down to 8%. So that's quite an interesting number. Now, if we drill into that in a slightly different way, so we looked at the conversions. So this, you can see, this is just actually in the last month. So they've done 500,000 pounds worth of revenue in the last month, and we can see that of all of the sessions, about, if you look at number one, the mobile sessions are running at about 10%, just 9.12%. And then if you look at numbers 2 and 3, you can see that mobile conversions and tablet conversions, number 2 and number 3, are right down at the 1%. So again, small numbers of conversions. So whilst there's a lot of noise in the market at the moment, that you're able to see the numbers here show that definitely mobile is on the increase, but the conversion points aren't necessarily happening on mobile. And we've got more data that we drill into behind this even further, where we can look at individual processes that individual people have followed when they've gone through their purchasing process. You can see multiple visits to the site. You can see multiple visits, and in those multiple visits, there may be one that's on mobile, which has happened at a particular conversion point. But then quite often, for decisions around a larger priced product or a more complex purchase, that is happening on the desktop. So whilst mobile is important, that's happening on the desktop. Now, looking at the mobile from another angle, you have probably heard about this concept of responsive site design. If you've been talking to people about new websites recently, you will see that people are talking about responsive site designs. There are actually 3 ways of implementing mobile. Responsive is now become the most popular, which is basically resizing dynamically based on the device that's looking at it and the size of that device. So if a tablet's looking at it, it's going to look a different size. So if say an iPhone type form factor or Android form factor phone is looking at it. Another one is adaptive. Now, the thing about the responsive one, by the way, is it's just one site. So there is only one site. It just changes shape based on what's looking at it. Adaptive, it detects the device similar to responsive, but it generates a different version of the site's HTML. So it's a slight variation on the approach, slightly less efficient from an indexing point of view. And then the oldest one, which has been shortened, labeled to MDOT, mobile dot, is often on a different domain. So you'd have a .mobi domain, for instance, where some sites will put up a completely different type of site that is not actually the same site as the original site, and they'll often cut down the amount of content quite significantly. I mean, I've got clients who've got .mobi sites of old where they only had about 8 pages on the .mobi site, on the basis that really, what do people want to know about me? Or, well, they want to know where I am, what my opening hours are, things like that. So there's a minimal amount of information that was on that .mobi site. So the responsive site is definitely the most popular, and from Google's point of view, they have a preferred approach, which is the responsive, and it's probably because it's actually using less of their resource, so they're not getting duplicate sites that are running in their index. The adaptive and the MDOT configurations also can lead to a higher bounce rate, because people will not get to the data they want to because there's not enough of it. So that's one way of interpreting that bounce rate, but that's certainly a feasible answer. The negative slightly against responsive is that it can take longer to load on mobile devices, which can have a slightly negative effect on the search results. But as you'll see, that's kind of counteracted in a minute. So if we looked at the impact on search, if you do mobile search, or it's important that people can find you on mobile devices, then personally I would do a responsive site, because it's going to have all of your pages indexed. Therefore, they're going to be more pages that are offered to mobile users. Therefore, they're going to stand a greater chance of finding them when they're looking on their mobiles. Also, there is no conclusive evidence that desktop search results are affected by mobile-friendly sites. So nowhere can anybody prove that Google is penalizing they're penalizing in the search results if you don't have a mobile-friendly site. That there have been various attempts and small surveys, and all the published stuff in all the search engine online news. Nobody can definitely say Google is penalizing because of lack of mobile support. So that's good news. So overall, I think mobile is important. It's not negatively affecting us in Google, but it is worth doing for my users' experience. So we will see benefits from users in terms of conversion rate improvements and giving them access to the data when they want it and where they want it. So if you've got any questions about that mobile, then do pop them into the question box, and I will come back to those at the end. You'll notice on the question box there is a slightly different way of putting in the questions. So if you can see that, great. If you can't, don't worry. Just put them in as chat, and I'll try and pick them up through the chat as well. And Pamela, just to let you know that the messages I see are a bit delayed, so that might be why we got a little out of sync earlier on from your message. So I will move on now to think about some design points, ways to design so that your website converts. So why are we focusing on conversion? Conversion is going to make your website deliver more value to you. Most websites lose money every day because they sell products or services really poorly to their visitors. Now, as the cost of media is increasing, so if the media to send new visitors to your website, as that's getting more expensive, by converting, you actually are enabling yourself to afford more power to buy that media. You're keeping more of the reserves, the cash reserves, to buy more media. Also, in the last couple of years, split testing software. Now, this is software that's helps you understand, you know, let's try that version of my page versus this version. Split testing software is getting very affordable. And it's therefore almost got to the point now where you could say that you've got more choice than ever to do testing and to think about conversion. And therefore, it's become more of a priority for people. Now, if you think about a website, one of the key first things you have to do is deal with the intuitive snap judgment that somebody who lands on a page on your website needs to answer. And there really falls down to, am I in the right place? Am I going to get more, than I invest from this visit to this site? And do the options available to me match what I'm looking for? If they've arrived because of a search and they don't see to that last one, then they may leave very quickly, and quite rightly so. If they're sent there from another site, a referring site, and they arrive in the wrong place, then they'll leave. So it's not unusual to have people leave because people end up in the wrong place quite a lot on the web. I'm sure we've all had that experience of kind of meandering around the web, and we're thinking, why am I here? How did I get here? Where did the last hour go? That's going on all the time. But if you are trying to convert, you want to make sure that the available options match their goals. So simple clues are very, very powerful. Now, this example here, it's a funny example I quite like. So this is an example for a home brewing company. It's actually a New Zealand site. So they specialize in home brew. Now, why is this interesting? Well, it's interesting from a number of points of view. It's got a very clear visual hierarchy. So, the first big thing, forget my good example at the top, because that's kind of obscuring the image there. The first big thing you see is brew your own beer and to be as unique as you are. And so it's got this quirky guy, so that the picture very much supports the message. The message is very clearly stated. And then it's got very clear separation through those two buttons between two types of visitors. View specials, that's targeted at a recurring visitor, somebody who knows what the site's about. And the new to brewing is a different discrete subset of their customers. And one of the things I'm going to talk about is actually clearly defining what your customer is and who your audience is. And they're very obvious calls to action. So that's a good example of the sort of instant appeal, getting the message across, telling people they're in the right place and thinking, oh yeah, I'm going to get more out of this. So it's quick and it's easy to get on with the story when you land on a page that's like that. Now, one of the key things you're going to need to start to do with to make conversions make sense is actually start measuring them. And there are 4 different ways that are very easy to set up in Google Analytics to measure conversions. The first one is visit duration. So visit duration, how many minutes has the visit lasted? The number of pages viewed, how many pages has the person viewed? Now, the thing we notice for people who convert is they last longer on the site, they look at more pages on the site. So these are 2 important elements that might help you understand a certain aspect of your visitors. And you might set a conversion to say, okay, I want to look at all visitors who've been on the site more than 3 times. More than 3 minutes, rather. Or you might say, I want to look at them, people who've looked at more than 8 pages, because you might find there's a correlation between those times and the people who convert on your site. Another thing you can track is the thank you pages. So if you have a conversion process, which say, let's them sign up for something or fill out a form, the thank you page is the form, the end of the thank you, at the end of the process where you say, thank you for filling out the form, here's your information. That's a destination type of measuring point. And these are called goals, by the way, in analytics, if you're familiar with analytics. And the final one is when they do something, you might say, okay, they've watched a video, they've downloaded a PDF, or they've clicked on a particular link, which is a call to action link. Some sites that we work a lot with the universities, and some of them, they have to take them off to centralized university registration systems. So all they can do is follow a link in certain cases because they can't actually get into the back end of the system. So there are quite valid events that you might want to track. These are all classed as events: video watching, downloading, PDFs. Understanding these conversion points. Now, some of these are macro conversions and some of them are micro conversions. So the macro conversion would be where they've signed up to enter into a sort of more of a sales or lead generation process with you. Micro conversions are maybe they've watched a video which supports the process. So it's a sales video and it's explaining why or what one might do if one took action. Now, what do you get as a result? Well, this is an example of a campaign where if you're tracking conversions well, you can see not only what converted. So this is a thank you funnel that's converting here, but you can see what source of traffic, for example, drove the most conversions. So you can see that the majority of conversions actually came from the homepage banner. So there was a banner placed on the homepage where it was advertising this particular download for the site. That was the best source of traffic. So that banner was actually on the homepage. One of the questions that someone asked, Catherine asked, was what can we put on our home pages? Well, selling some of your conversions is a good thing to put on the homepage, and you can see evidence here of this was just traffic coming to the site, and as a result of it arriving, there was a compelling offer, and off they went to see this. You can also see that they've sent out emails, 2 sets of emails there, and Twitter, LinkedIn, and Facebook are the last 3. And you can see what different sources of traffic actually led to conversions. This helps you understand then, once you know what's converting, how you're improving if you're making changes to those conversions. So what you need to think about is you need to think about how you might measure your website success. And there's a measurement model that you can create. If you want to find out more about that, give me a call and I'll talk you through it. But having a measurement model for your website helps you understand what you can do to measure those things and what constitutes a successful outcome and what is not a successful. And it drives all of your thinking then to test different ways of converting. Now, one of the things then, talking about layout on pages, this is a heat map of how people typically view a page. You'll see the red area. The red area is where they've got a great deal of attention, and the blue areas are where they've less, and the yellow in between. Now, you'll note that there's an F shape to the pattern. Readers focus on copy around the headline. So the headline is top left. Most of the first paragraph is often read fully, especially if it's a very compelling first paragraph. And then they tend to jump down and scan. And you can see in this particular example, the bullet points are scanned items. And bullet points are a very good example of scannability. You definitely want to try and make your pages as scannable as possible, because people don't tend to read very long form copy on the web unless they're really that kind of person. I find it very difficult to read long form copy on web pages. Note also that on the right hand side you've got some images which are actually supposed to be adverts, and there's this term called banner blindness, which is people don't they go, oh, that's an advert, and they ignore it completely. They just kind of block it out. We've learned that those sorts of images are usually ads, and it's much more common than people realize. And it also applies to other popular page elements. So if you disguise buttons, for example, as images, you will find possibly that you need to turn the button back into a button shape for people to realize it's something you click, because images are not examples of that. And I'll actually show an example of that where there was some interesting feedback in a minute. So I want to do a quick experiment here. What I want you to do is I want you to look at the image of the guy looking at us there. And I want you to look away from the screen for a couple of seconds and then look back and see where your eye goes. So you should be able to look away and then look back and see what the first thing you looked at, and then what's the second thing. So what you should be seeing is that your eyes lock straight on his face, and then go down to the no thanks, go to the website. Now, as an experiment, here's the same image the other way around. So do the experiment again. And now look back, and where do your eyes go? Now, I always go back to first class email specialist is giving away tips for doubling sales. Now, there are other things that aren't quite right about this, like having the white writing on the black background. That could be improved if you flicked it the other way around. But if you compare the two, what was found was by swapping those around, the image on the left, more people clicked no thanks, go to the website than signed up. Now, obviously, this is a page that he wants people to sign up. So just by switching those two things around, he was able to increase his conversion dramatically. And this is an example of the sort of thing, the sort of subtlety that one can play around with, and the use of positioning. You remember the F shape? The F shape, people tend to start reading from the left. And by moving the stuff to the left, the important stuff should be on the left. And you know, you're distracted by his eyes, they hook you in. So there's some very interesting psychology going on there. The other thing I wanted to talk about was that when people come to your site, do not assume they are ready to buy. They may be just you know, wanting to find out more. They're in the very early stages of awareness, and there's this hierarchy of awareness, interest, and sale that they go through. There's many studies have been done that, you know, you need to have multiple touch points with a person before they're ready to buy. So example here is, imagine you're selling a course, say on DIY home repair. So what your visitor wants is they want to learn about some DIY home repair, you know, thing. They want to know how to fix some plumbing thing, for example. What you want is you want to sell them a course. So you want to get them to buy your course. Now, how do you go about that? Well, the first thing you want to do is offer them free DIY advice, for instance, via your blog, your videos, your downloads. This helps you to become a trusted advisor in their eyes. Now, you could be sending valid traffic from paid advertising, let's say from a Facebook ad, to advice, just to build that trust. And if you're using Facebook remarketing, you can use Facebook remarketing very effectively to do that. So you can send people there, and if they've been there, you can then send them somewhere else and build up over time traffic to your site looking just at valuable content. Then at a certain point in the process, you want to give them a compelling reason to sign up to your email list. Now, it is getting more and more difficult to get people to sign up to email lists, but you know, the old process of giving them some good value, some good information, for example. In this example, I'm saying, let's say a free video course delivered over several days via email on a sort of drip feed basis. That would be a good example of a compelling piece of information. And people, by the time they've started to trust your content and not think, oh, well, you're just getting them Me Too content, once they see some value there, they will quite likely make that conversion and start to get into the process of getting closer to you. Now, after they've consumed enough content, enough free content, it is worth sending them to your sales copy, so to a sales page, and asking them for a sale, because they'll be disposed, if that's what I'm getting for free, then it's likely the stuff I'll get if I pay for it is going to be even better. That logic does work. But you see the process here. We're not going straight away with an expectation that they're ready to buy. We're going with an expectation that they're just looking, they're just browsing, and we're building their interest, and then we're asking them if they want to buy. So there's that process that is a good process to model. So there are some questions that you could start to ask to improve your conversion. Now, you're going to get the replay for this, so you don't necessarily need to have these down, but I will send you out with these questions and some other questions further on down the line that I'll give you, which will help to give you some things to follow up on. So have you defined a clear person who you're targeting for each of your services and products? The more clear you are about that, the better. The more you can tailor your calls to action and other commentary to make sure that you're supporting that particular person. Do you have a clear call to action on each of your conversion pages? I see conversion pages, people expecting conversion text, and there's no actual, please do whatever we want them to do. Are you measuring all of your conversion routes? For example, are you measuring those are the people that are coming in by telephone versus email versus the web? Then not everybody is going to come in by the web. They want to pick up the phone and talk. Can you test alternative calls to action and improve conversions? Can you test different ways of directing people from your main landing pages to your conversion pages? That example on the home page, having an advert that's advertising your call to action, your conversion pages. There are loads of ways of getting people to your conversions. And those are some examples of ways to think about improving your conversion. So again, any questions, if you want to pop them in the question box, then that will be good, and I'll pick those up at the end. So I'll move on. I want to talk now about the content management system. The content management system, why are we using a content management system? The primary reason is they're easier to maintain content because you can edit it in-house, you can edit it from multiple machines and so on and so forth. They're easier to develop your site over time. I'm applying this to the good content management systems. Easier to refresh the design at a later date. So if you've designed your site and you've built it on a decent content management system, you should be able to completely change the design without touching any of the underlying content unless you really need to. Now, this can dramatically reduce the cost of refreshing a design at a later date. So those are the primary reasons. Now, when you're thinking about selecting a vendor or a platform, there are 4 primary things that I think about. 1, support. How frequently are updates to the underlying software being released? And this includes security fixes. Unless that's happening on a regular basis, for instance, every quarter you're getting a new update, I'm dubious as to whether the company underneath is big enough to support that content platform. Though the people who are managing the development of the platform actually have a vision for where they're trying to get to. They have a clear roadmap of where they're headed, and is it in the right direction for you? I always look for a large community of users and developers, and I say users and developers because if I can find a platform that's got a lot of users, people who know how the platform works, then my team, I could bring in people into my team who already know the platform, and so therefore I don't have to train them. They don't have a learning curve. Obviously, on the development side, if I want to be able to extend what I can do with the platform, then I want to be able to get access to developers who know the platform. So I want a large community of both users and developers. I want to know that the company behind it is stable and it's their primary focus. So I want to know that that's core to their overall strategy. If this is just an opportunity for them, which they may then sell to a bigger company, it'll disappear into that bigger company. It'll lose focus. So this needs to be strategically important to them. When you're defining your requirements, you're going to have different requirements. Now, some of them are going to be very idiosyncratic to you. They are highly specific to your business, and therefore they are absolutely distinguishing in their need. They are also probably priority requirements. But priority requirements are worth defining as well. Those are the ones that will basically say, well, if you can't support this, then you're not the right platform for us. They rule platforms out. So that's an important thing when you're defining your requirements. The common requirements that we're seeing, and this list could go on, but we need to be able to change design without recreating the content. We need to define different content types, for instance, product data, case studies, etc. And I'll show you an example of one of those in a minute. We need to be able to support, modify the layout templates to support any design that we want. So not strictly controlled templates. You can only design it in this way. We want flexibility. We need to easily add third-party plugins and connect to apps or extensions. There are a lot of fantastic marketing tools which you need to plug into your website, and you want to think about choosing a platform which will give you that flexibility to connect to those third-party plugins and tools. We also want control over who can edit what roles, edit what with the roles and permissions. meaning as you grow, as your team grows, you might want to have 2 people over here in the product team who can only edit products, and someone over here who can edit all the blog posts, but they can't edit anything else. So that kind of control. We also want to be able to author and approve content if you have an approval process equally well on all the platforms: Windows, Mac, tablet, mobile, etc. And we want version history so that if somebody makes a change and we can roll it back. We want, some cases, multilingual support, because we want to put out a site in different parts of the world, the same site. So it needs to be able to support people arriving who want to see the site in French or Italian, as we had this morning. We want full support for responsive design, for mobile, and the content can be delivered in that way. And it needs to be able to integrate with some system X, whatever it is. So these are common requirements. And you also wanted to make coffee, which I quite like. There's a little image there. Your list will be different, but there are some common ones that we keep seeing over and over again. Now, the other thing to think about is hosting. Where are you hosting it? I would separate that out as a separate part of the CMS, but hosts need to specialize in your CMS. They need to know it. So they need to be blooming fast. The hosting site needs to be very fast. That is definitely affecting search results. Google are very clear about that. If you have a slow site, they will slightly penalize your results. So they need to be insanely fast. They need to have specialized telephone, email, and chat and technical support. Because the only time you need to reach out to your hosting company is when you've got a problem. And if they don't understand your platform, then they're not going to be of much help to you, which is why I say they need to be specialized in your platform. Ideally, I want these days to have a staging server that I can develop and test changes. No website is static. We're moving on and on with our websites. We're making changes. I want to be able to test those on a copy of the site, and then when they're ready, move them to the live site. I want built-in backup and restore. Quite a lot of people do backups, but I want to be able to just click a button and restore back to yesterday's backup if something has terribly gone wrong. It should be one click of a button. I also want enhanced security above and beyond the CMS that's delivered from the hosting platform. So that's another key important one for me. So we recommend and use WordPress. It's what we do all our development on. It ticks every single one of those boxes and more. And for hosting, we use WP Engine, who are a specialized WordPress hosting company. So all our clients that have come onto our services in the last 2 years, we build on WP Engine now, and it provides all of those speed and flexibility and the ability to do staging and what have you. So that's what and I would look no further personally. WordPress. If you were coming to us to talk about a web, we would talk about WordPress. Now, obviously, there are other fantastic platforms. Drupal is also a fantastic platform. The problem is, for me, with Drupal is there are less people who know it, both from a user point of view and a developer point of view. That's the only issue I really have with Drupal. I think, certainly it'll do everything WordPress will do, and vice versa. So if you've got any questions, again, pop them into the chat or the question box. So just talking about a case study, and specifically honing in on complex website data. So this was an idiosyncratic requirement that a client of ours had. They're a commercial lighting company. Their target audience is architects and specifiers. So they sell into big buildings. They have a very complex product data that they wanted to be able to edit in-house. Prior to moving this data onto the web, it used to be in this big printed book, like 2 inches thick. And they used to have to get this thing printed every 6 months or so. It was out of date as soon as it went to print. You know the story. They wanted to move all of that onto the web. So what we did was we built that part of it for them as part of the project. Now, in example, the complexities, they wanted multiple ways to categorize each product so that people could filter by different ways. They wanted both large contextual images and smaller technical images. They had very complicated data, and trust me, this is a simple example of a table. There are tables that have got 100 rows in them and more columns. They wanted a color scheme. If you're red, green, colorblind like me, you might not be able to see that as clearly, but there's a color scheme. A DALI is in red, and the WH of white is in red, and the GR of gray is in red, and so on. And they wanted to be able to provide this color scheme so that the specifiers could use that when they were actually specifying their requirements. They also wanted related products and technical documents. And so what we were able to do was then to make that easy to edit. We created very simple tick boxes for setting up all the different categories. We created these complex data requirements. We separated them into really simple edit boxes. So people didn't need to think about formatting and how is it going to look. They just typed the data. We created a really simple schema for doing that color highlighting. So we just put 2 hyphens on either side of whatever was supposed to be the highlighted color. And then we processed that when we render the page to deal with that. But they didn't have to worry. They just put the letters in and put them in with the double hyphens, and we handled the rest. Related files, they could put up as many as they wanted really simply. Same with related documents. And we had a very easy to use table editor that looked a bit like Google Sheets or Excel online. And that meant they were able to make the minor changes. So as new lighting configurations came out, they could just whiz in there, make this slight change, bing, they're done. So this is definitely feasible with today's CMSs. You just need to be talking to the people with the right skills to implement them. If you're not getting the right answers, then, well, you can certainly come and talk to us about it, but you should be able to find developers who can do this for you. Certainly this was all done in WordPress. It was a detailed project, but a straightforward project. So with the right CMS and implementation skills, it's possible to make the most complex data simple to edit. The point here is that a lot of web agencies have in the past said, no, we think we should manage that for you. That's no longer the case. You should be able to manage that. So again, if you've got any questions on that, please pop your questions into there from an answer. So the final point I wanted to talk about was striking the right balance between user experience and design, just pure design. And I've got a definition of user experience here. So when we're talking about user experience, this has been over the last probably 10 years in the web. There's been this growth of user experience that is, some people got onto very, very early on, but it's all about making it easier for the user to use your site. So thinking about your site from the user's experience. So you're not just designing, which is all about aesthetics and color and so on and so forth. You're actually thinking about user design and also what technology is required to enable that user design. So there's a sort of subtle interplay between those 3 things. Now, there is a definite distinction between a UX designer, a user experience designer, and a UI designer who's designing things from a look and feel point of view. Their thought processes are different. They're thinking about different processes. They're more thinking about task flows, the user experience designer. They're more thinking about scenarios, whereas the UI designer is more thinking about colors and typography and stuff like that, which is fine, has its place, but shouldn't be ruling the roost. They have a human-centered design philosophy, the UX designers, whereas the UI designers are more visual design. So things that would clash for the UI designer may really work for the UX designer. And you get this very different way of thinking about the world. So you get wireframes that discuss the importance of simplification. We'll see some examples of those in a minute. Whereas when you design, you can over design something, and you can come up with something that isn't quite intuitive. So you can take the intuitiveness away. And actually, one of the members of the call today on his site, he has a button, and he'll know who he is when he sees the button. And there was a very interesting case a couple of years ago with this button where people were phoning in saying, I'm not sure I can see it, but I'll show you the example in a minute. So that is a common sort of user experience versus design issue. Here's the design, the clear path, and the user experience is the shortcut across the sidewalk. So there's a few more examples I'm going to just walk you through. This is an example of a choice button. So we're asking the user to make a choice. So there's neutral, positive, negative, positive. So you can see the neutral and positive where you've got the green and the blue in the first top left, or the red and the blue. Because they've both got strong, they're both strong colors, there's less contrast, and it's therefore more difficult to click on the one you want. The positive on the right, by making the contrast much clearer, makes it easier to make the choice. And you can influence outcomes based on this technique. This is an example of a button that one of the members on the call today actually has on their site, and that button is been repurposed as a button. So it is no longer obviously a button, even though it says book now. And there were some people who were phoning in and saying, I don't know how to book online. And yet there is what we thought was like the clearest button on the planet, because it's massive. It's the reason it's cut off is it sits at the top of the page. It's still on every single page as well. But it's an example of what can happen if you apply too much design to something as obvious as a button. A button, we know what it looks like. It's a sort of lozenge-shaped thing, typically. An example here is less choice increasing conversion rate. So now this is an example of a wireframe where the design isn't really there. It's what we're trying to talk about here. This is what a UX person would use. They would say, actually, I don't want the navigation spread out on 3 links. I want it under this is called a hamburger menu. You click on that and it comes down. Now these have become very popular with mobile responsive designs. So they're now becoming very commonplace, and we're seeing more and more hamburgers used in web design to simplify web design and the competing attention when you're completing something like a form. We don't want them navigating away from this, but we do want some ability to see things if they need it. And this is another example, making a process really clear. So we've got multiple stages. We color code the stages. That's a little subtle on the color coding for the colorblind amongst us. But again, it's really clear, stage 1, stage 2, stage 3, stage 4. And if you can reduce the steps in any way, keep them to the minimum, all the better, because that can help. So you've got visual clues and a reduction in the number of steps. So there's some quick things that you can ask. First of all, does your content follow a visual hierarchy on your web page? If you look at that example on the right, your eyes here, then here. Isn't that fascinating? So the large content is what you see first. It's even when you can see the other, it's still drawing your eyes. And then the smaller text, and then the very small text, it has a clear visual hierarchy. You can use the same approach on any web page by size and color and contrast and shape and position, and the use of white space. You can actually affect how clearly your message is communicated. So look at your pages with that sort of thinking in mind. Can you position or improve your call to action buttons? And also remove other distracting links. We did a really interesting experiment with a client site a few years ago where we were analyzing the site, and we saw that on key decision pages, there were so many choices and there's so many links on the site. You could see on the click traffic that people were moving away from the site because there were too many choices. By reducing the number of choices, we were able to improve the conversion rates. Can you simplify your navigation, reducing choices? Can you optimize your website to be fast? Speed is really important. People will leave websites at a greater rate of frequency the slower the website happens, it takes to load. So if you can get your website sub 2 seconds is good, but sub 1 second is even better, then you are going to have a very sticky site in comparison. You're going to be losing people because of speed. Things like logical category names and interesting product names. These are also things that you could use to improve your user experience. So you by calling categories what they are, that are so obvious and they're so tangible, they're almost solid in the imagination. This helps users understand what they're seeing. And also, are your pages scannable? Could you use more headlines? Those kinds of things to make your pages easier to scan for users, because users do scan large chunks of them. So again, any questions, please pop them in the box there. So I've got some questions that came in earlier before when people registered. Alex asked about planning SEO, the site name, URL, positioning the URL correctly, etc., how to fight the competition. So this isn't quite on the topic of the stuff I've been talking about today, but it's obviously hugely relevant to websites. So the site name, first of all, let's roll the clock back, say 4 years, 5 years. There was a point where Google, you could buy a domain name which had the keyword that you were wanting to attract traffic to, that you thought your users most commonly searched in order to find what you were selling, and your website would almost inevitably get to page 1 without even thinking about it. That is no longer the case. Plenty of sites that have got a history in the index of being positioned highly for a particular search term will not necessarily be moved aside by Google just because you own the domain. So you do have to work on the validity of that domain and your position in the website. So for me, the site name is not important from an SEO point of view. Any site of any domain name can rank for any term, assuming it has all the right things behind it. For example, the authority and so on and so forth. So the site name does not need to affect SEO. Now, if it's the case that you have a site name where there is virtually zero competition, then there is a chance that you might be ranked very easily for a particular keyword if that's in the site name. But I would not plan my SEO around that. Regarding URL and the positioning the URL, so the URL, I would say, is a very big lever point for SEO. And the way I use the URL is I try and include in the URL of any page that I'm trying to get to rank for a particular keyword, I include that keyword. So if I'm trying to get I've got a client who does printers, for example, if I want second user production printer, I will have that in the URL of the page if I can. And that helps to for that page to rank better for that particular keyword phrase. The same would be true also for the title of that page, which is what you see at the top of the search results when it gets indexed. I'd also say that including the main heading of that page, the heading 1 of that page, would also have an impact on that. So line up what the page is about to the words that you're using. Let me just take a sip of water. Finally, the positioning of the URL. Now, I wasn't completely clear about what you meant by this, and maybe we can take this offline, Alex. But the positioning the URL correctly, in essence, the rule of thumb I use is I want to see the keyword for that page as early in the URL string as I can get it. So I don't want it buried 6 layers deep with, // // // // I've got a client with that very problem at the moment, which I'm helping them with. The URL shouldn't be too deep. The flatter the sites, the better. The example I always cite is Wikipedia. Wikipedia has effectively one level of depth for all the wiki pages. So it goes wikipedia.org/ or en.wikipedia.org/ wiki/ page name, and you will see that the URL has the same same keyword as the title, as the main heading for the page, and everything lines up. And guess what? They perform really well in search. So you get good results by following that pattern. So I hope that's some useful pointers. Alex, give me a ring if you want some more. Drop me an email and I'll liaise with you. Catherine asked, what info should be on the homepage? So the homepage for me, well, let's wind it back a bit. For most sites, the homepage is the top visited page on the site. That's for most sites. The exceptions will be where the site has very good performance on a particular page for a particular keyword, and they get a lot of entry traffic on that particular page. If that's the case for your site, then what you want to be putting on that homepage is signposts to the important information. So you want to be clear about who your visitors are, and you want to put the signpost to the important visitor information. Now, there's a question, and another question that Barry asked is how many drop downs per icon on the toolbar, which kind of relates to something I'm going to say about this homepage question. There's psychology of written text and presenting data, there's a thing called the chunking limit. And the chunking limit is usually between 5 and 7 items of information. So you could apply this to bullet points, you could apply this to menu items, you could apply this to the home page. You want focus. Reducing down to the minimum you can get to between 5 and 7 is the way to create that focus. And again, that's the same on the drop downs. I wouldn't always try and get my drop downs to be as few as possible, between 5 and 7, because people get overwhelmed with the level of choice if you go beyond that. That's what triggers that. They go into like, can't see the wood for the trees. So they're 5 to 7 would be my preferred choice. Now, there's some cases where you can't do that. And if that's the case, particularly in this example of the drop downs, you could break them up into small groups. So we did a change recently to a client who they needed an extra that was taking them over 7. So what we did was we moved 3 of them up into a very high menu bar at the very top right of the site, where you kind of see things like contact us quite commonly, or other things like that. And by moving those up there were 3 links then at the top right, and then we reduced actually down to 5 in the main navigation bar. We ended up making it clearer and less cluttered, and that was an effective approach there. So those are the questions that have come in. Thanks, Alex, for your feedback. I'm just looking through the comments. Yeah, I think I've answered everything else. How do you discover? Okay, everybody. I'll say à tout à l'heure and see you all soon. Cheers for now.